Welcome to another episode. What are you reading? What are you writing? A weekly video podcast features creatives, writers, and readers when we come together to talk about books. I am your host, Karen E. Osborne, author of 4 novels and counting. I am so glad you're here. I think you're going to enjoy our next guest. And I told you you're going to love our guest today, and you will meet Lynne Shaner. Hey, Lynne.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me on, Karen.
Oh, I'm so delighted to talk to you and have met you in person, which was so cool. So,
It was
Lynne
nice.
is here to discuss her debut novel called Journey to Everland Bay. And here's what one reviewer wrote: a beautiful, engaging fantasy teeming with dragons, fae, magic, and the importance of family and friendship. A joy to read from beginning to end. I found myself rooting for our main heroine, Gemma, as she grew into a wonderful and powerful young woman. I am already looking forward to the next work in this thrilling series. Now, that's an awesome review.
Thank you.
So, I have only recently fallen in love with fantasy and dragons and fairies and shapeshifters, and it's not been my genre of choice for many, many years, but because
Mhm.
of the show, I have just met so many cool writers and read their books. So I'm really looking forward to this. Tell us the premise of this book.
Sure. Um, Gemma Avalon is an unconventional mage in training, and she longs to return to Everland Bay, her ancestral homeland, and find a way to join the magical research institute there, like the women in her family before her. So it's a multi-generational saga. Daughter of a gentle, part elf, part fae woman, and a father with fiery dragon blood, an unusual combination even in the magical world. 10 years after her mother's sudden death, she's working at a major museum in Washington, D.C., where magic is all but outlawed. Her father wants her to assimilate and live without magic, but Gemma is determined to fully embrace her magical heritage. When an ordinary day at the museum takes an extraordinary turn, Gemma is rocketed to an Everland Bay institute under violent siege, where dark arts mages threaten everything important to her. Once there, she joins forces with her companions and she works feverishly to save Everland Bay from crumbling under enemy attack. In so doing, she finds a path to her own strength and mastery and her heart's true home. It is also a book about friendship, about the bonds of family, both families we are born into and families that we have found along the way, and of coming together to solve problems as a community. There is much that I find and others have found delightful in the book, including magical knitting, a fabulous and magical bookstore, books that fly, pegasi the size of walnuts, and a variety of other remarkable creatures. So it's been a fun book to write.
Magical knitting. How cool is that? That's so good. So, what do you love about Gemma?
I love Gemma's resilience. Gemma is in the book, we see her in the prologue at 15 years old, and then we jump 10 years and she's 25 for the rest of the book. So this is an adult fantasy that reads for, I believe, any age, but that's to give you a framework. And she is finding her pathway, like so many of us, trying to find where are we going in our lives? I love her resilience. She does not have an easy path. She was not given, like the Harvard pass into the Everland Bay Institute. Her pathway was bifurcated and torn up as a result of family difficulties as well as this difficulty in Everland Bay. But she keeps going. She reaches out, she connects to friends and family, and she wants to continue and chooses to go forward. She also isn't a lone savior, a lone heroine, but she's a woman who connects with others to solve problems.
She does sound wonderful. She does sound really terrific. Um, so lots of times when I don't know if this happens to you, but lots of times my characters take me places that I didn't intend. I didn't, I think we're going this way, and my character makes a right turn, and and sometimes I get annoyed with them. I want to say, no, stop that. So is there anything that you are hoping Gemma would learn, get over, um, try to do better?
Yes, actually, I one of the things that was surprising to this book was that there was a whole path ahead for her, and then the institute fell under violent siege, and it kind of essentially blew up. So that changed the book a lot. So the book's characters kind of changed the trajectory, but I also wanted her to keep going. I really wanted her to be able to find her own path because she had many reasons to be discouraged. She was not given an easy journey. This is partly a book about second chances because the first chances were kind of blown up. She didn't have the option for an easy life. And so I was hoping that she would continue to persevere despite a lot of losses, despite a lot of sadness. And she did. So no spoilers here, but she continues in her journey.
She continues. That is great. Um, Other things that really fascinates me is world building. I've interviewed gamers who became writers, so they had to build a world in their gaming world and then change it. So you had to do world building, right? You had to create this fantasy world. Tell me what that experience was like.
It is a really interesting experience, and I, it, it's one of those things that you see the phrase world building, or one sees the phrase world building as a part of what we do as fantastical or speculative writers. And yet, as I'm in it, I'm not thinking of it sort of as something I'm doing. It's as
Mm,
if in fact, what I experience is that I close my eyes and enter that world, and it is all around me. Part of that is I've been working on this story for a very long time. And over the years, this world of Everland Bay, developed as a part of that imagining and the different pathways I went in my own mind's eye. But this is a grounded urban fantasy. So the world looks very much like our own, but with various magical and mythical elements and aspects. It borrows from the otherworld tradition that is familiar to Celtic lore and Arthurian lore, and it borrows from and Shakespearean lore. So we enter a world that looks a lot like our own, but in fact is enchanted. So there's a mixing of worlds. I call it the woven world in this book that
mm.
draws very deeply on our own landscapes. So that makes it, in some ways, I won't say easier, but a little different than creating a medieval world that has particular castles, for example. But one of
Yeah.
the things that I do in this world, and one of the reasons that I do write in this genre at this point, is also I get to set the framework. In this fantastical tradition, there is no patriarchy. Women are in charge here and have a great deal of authority as a result. And it is just the way we do it in Everland Bay. It's not that there are no men, but the men here are good and kind, except for the bad guys. So I also create a world in which I question the premise of our world. So that's a lot of fun.
That's cool. Yeah. A world where women are in charge. Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You're welcome anytime.
So this is book one.
Mhm.
Have you started book two? Is it finished? Like what's happening with Gemma?
Yes, Gemma is on her way. And in fact, I'll point my finger right there. You see those binders? They're very
Oh
messy
yeah.
on my very messy writer's bookshelf. So those
Yes.
are the binders for book 2. And
Mm.
I am now in the final stages of the polishing revisions. So I will be ready to submit this book pretty shortly, probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. If all goes well. So
Excellent. So there'll be a sequel next year. That is
yes,
that is
yes,
awesome.
assuming and hoping, fingers tightly crossed, that my publisher, we share a publisher. I'm hoping that my publisher will accept this book. So I will find that out soon.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Are you working on anything else?
I am, like so many of us, I have so many different thoughts and ideas. And there's something about beginning your journey I think as a novel writer, that my experience has been like, it's as if a door opened and all of these other books are waiting. Not just the Everland Bay books, but I have so many ideas. I'm not sure that I have enough time in this one life to get to them all. So I have another book that will be a standalone that's kind of waiting right here. And I plan to do that one next. That's sort of a little bit of magical realism and women's fiction. And then I have another potential series that I have kind of over here. And then I also write short stories and poetry. And I'm behind on getting back to my poetry, but I hope to get back to it soon. I had a piece, a short story, accepted and published recently, and that always feels so good, so comforting, and delightful. So,
Yeah, my son is a short story writer. He's a
mm,
published short story writer. He gets into good literary magazines, a couple of
mm.
stories a year, but he's taking his first stab at a novel and finding it
Oh,
so
wonderful.
different.
Yes,
That's
yes,
so different. And I have so
yes.
many short stories written that have gotten nowhere. So there you
Oh,
go.
well, but at
Matter of
least it
fact,
exercises that muscle,
it does.
right?
It does.
And word finding and phrase making and all the different things, all the aspects, but it is a very
Yeah,
different form.
it
I find it
is.
very challenging. Yeah.
Every time I submit a short story, I get back, this sounds like the beginning of a novel. So, how have um, authors or books from your past had a big impact on either your life or on your writing, on your poetry, whatever you'd like to talk about? But I know we're all influenced by other authors. Tell me
Oh,
what influenced
absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Such a good question. Of course, like so many of us, I grew up reading voraciously. I think one of the greatest gifts my parents gave to me was a love of reading and an exposure to reading that was so normative. My mother read books to us every evening when we were little kids, chapter by chapter. Yep, right? And we had books all around us. Some of the books over there are from my mother's library. She is now sadly long gone. But that instilling of books as being part of what we read and breathe and live in is a part of that. I grew up with fairy tales and the notion of magic, and I love that. And I was fascinated by fairies and little people from the time I was a little person. And I had a grandmother who particularly encouraged this, and she loved the notion of imagination. So that was part of it. It was in the air I breathed. But then I also, I loved The Mists of Avalon when I was in, I think, my late teens or whenever that came out, 20s. That reimagining of the Arthurian world by a powerful woman it had great meaning for me. And I also loved the Mort Arthur and Once and Future King and those books about the Arthurian tradition. And then I segued into some of the more sophisticated fantastical writers, including Patricia McKillop, Juliette Marillier, Ursula Le Guin, Margaret Atwood, all of those people who took the reins in the stories of the fantastic and exploded the tradition into new places and pathways. And then, um, there are so many others, Naomi Novik and V.E. Schwab, and there so many. And then I also read, like so many of us, widely. I love literary fiction. I have enjoyed tremendously Anne Patchett's work in Tom Lake, and many of her other things. After Annie by Anna Quinlan, Kingsolver's work, Kristen Hanna's work, including her recent book, The Women. So I do tend to tilt toward female voices. And I've also really enjoyed nonfiction, like the work about from naturalists such as Suzanne Simard, who recently wrote Finding the Mother Tree, that notion of the community of the forest. So there's so many. And I also must say, I recently was, for obvious reasons, I was looking through your own work, and you have such a lovely collection of books that you have
Thank you.
published. And I recently was just sort of looking at the description for your most recent book, True Grace, and I love the elements in that story. So I began reading it. I am absolutely hooked. So I love bringing in voices from a variety of authors' lives, including yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So people really are interested in you now. Just know that. Everybody's like all excited that it's watching. So how can they find you? Where can they find you?
Well, thank you for asking. I will hold up a copy of my book so people can see it. I don't know if it shows up backwards on the
It shows up
screen.
beautifully though. It looks great.
So it's Journey to Everland Bay, book one of the Everland Bay series. You can find me at my website, lynneshaner.com. That's all one word, LYNNESHANER. Don't forget that E.com. Facebook, author Lynne Shaner, and Twitter, the @ symbol and L Shaner _author. And then I'm on Threads or Instagram, but mostly Threads at Lynne, LYNNE.Shaner. So I'm easy to
Thank you.
find.
Yes. And so you need to go and visit Lynn's website, follow her on as many places as you possibly can, and buy her book. And we love reviews. Buy and review, something that helps us all. I hope that you're already following me, Karen E. Osborne, on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, and very, very recently Threads. I've sort of given up on Twitter. And I hope that you guys will come back next week for the next episode of What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks, Lynne. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Karen.